The summoning. The grand deliberation chamber of the Korvathi Empire stretched 3 kilometers beneath the crystalline crust of their capital world, Thessera Prime. Within its obsidian walls, silence was law. For 8,000 years, the Council of Hierarchs had governed 14 star systems without raising their voices above a whisper. Today that silence felt like a tomb. Hierarchs Velman, Kisara, and Thexol sat upon their floating platforms, their gray skin pulled tight with anxiety. Between them, holographic displays flickered with devastating data. Trade routes severed, colonies going dark, military fleets paralyzed by an enemy that struck without warning and vanished without trace. The Razakine swarm had awakened. "The human arrives," Velman announced, his words barely disturbing the air. At 400 years old, he had never seen his people so afraid. The Korvathi prided themselves on calculated responses, on careful deliberation. Panic was for lesser species. But the Razakine were not lesser. They were older than most galactic civilizations, a hive intelligence that had slumbered in the void between galaxies for millennia. Now they were feeding, and the Korvathi Empire was on the menu. The chamber doors irised open with a whisper of displaced air. Rena Castellanos strode in wearing scuffed military boots, cargo pants with too many pockets, and a jacket that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she carried a battered data pad under one arm. She looked like she just rolled out of bed. She was humanity's foremost expert on xenobiology, a decorated war hero from the Centauri conflicts, and, according to her file, completely ungovernable. "Good morning." Rena's voice boomed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Several junior Korvathi attendants flinched. "Or is it evening here? Your rotation period is weird. Anyway, got your distress call. Something about bugs?" Kisara's neck tendrils twitched with displeasure. The hierarchs had debated for 3 days whether to contact humanity at all. Humans were loud, chaotic. They laughed at funerals and made jokes during negotiations. They were everything the Korvathi were not. But they were also survivors. Somehow, impossibly, humanity had carved out 12 colony worlds in just 2 centuries. They fought wars with singing and turned disasters into celebrations. They were absurd. They were also never conquered. "Ambassador Castellanos," Velman began carefully, "we thank you for—" "Not an ambassador anymore," Rena interrupted, plopping herself down on the steps below their platforms. She pulled out what looked like a sandwich from one of her pockets. "Got fired for calling the Deltharian trade minister a pompous windbag with the personality of a tax form. Turns out he understood English better than we thought. Anyway, I'm freelance now. You're paying my consulting fee, right?" Thexol's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion. "We are prepared to compensate." "Great. So bugs? Tell me everything." For the next hour, the hierarchs explained. The Razakine swarm had emerged from dark space 3 months ago. They didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't leave survivors. They consumed everything, ships, stations, even orbital infrastructure, breaking it down into raw materials for their ever-expanding fleet. The Korvathi military had tried everything: particle beams, kinetic strikes, biological weapons, even reality distortion devices. Nothing worked. The swarm adapted instantly, evolving defenses against any attack within minutes. 14 Korvathi battle groups had been destroyed. 73 billion citizens were behind swarm lines. The Empire's best strategic minds estimated total collapse within 6 months. Rena listened, taking notes on her datapad while eating her sandwich. When they finished, she was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Then she started laughing. It wasn't polite laughter. It was the full-bodied, tear-streaming, bend-over gasping kind of laughter. It echoed through the chamber like artillery fire. Velman felt his respiratory sacs constrict. "You find our extinction amusing?" Rena wiped her eyes. Sorry. It's just, you guys are going about this completely wrong. You're trying to outthink a hive mind. You're using logic against a species that's basically one giant optimization algorithm. Of course they're kicking your asses. Then what would you suggest?" Kisara asked coldly. Rena stood up, dusting crumbs off her pants. "You need to be stupid." The silence that followed was absolute. "Stupid," Thexol repeated as if tasting a foreign word. "Yeah. Random, chaotic, unpredictable, gloriously stupid. The Razakine adapt because they can predict responses based on efficiency and logic. But you know what evolution can't adapt to fast enough? Pure, beautiful randomness." Rena grinned. "You called the right species. Humanity wrote the book on creative stupidity." Velman exchanged glances with his fellow hierarchs. Everything in their culture screamed that this was wrong. Chaos led to disaster. Randomness led to waste. Careful planning had built their empire. Careful planning was also getting them killed. What exactly are you proposing? Velman asked. Rena pulled up her data pad, fingers flying across the screen. I need 3 things: access to your military command network, authorization to requisition any ship in your fleet, and a list of every crazy idea your people have had for fighting the swarm that you rejected as too risky or insufficiently dignified. She looked up at the 3 hierarchs, her smile sharp as broken glass. Trust me. I'm about to make this war very, very annoying for the bugs. The plan. The Strategic Operations Center was a cathedral of hushed efficiency. 200 Korvathi military officers monitored holographic displays in perfect silence, communicating through subtle hand gestures and quiet beeps from their neural interfaces. The air hummed with controlled precision. Rena Castellanos destroyed that atmosphere in under 30 seconds. All right, people, listen up. She hopped onto the central command platform, nearly knocking over Admiral Catherine in the process. New rules. First, if you have an idea, you shout it. Second, if something's funny, you laugh. Third, anyone caught overthinking gets put on bathroom duty. Catherine steadied himself, his silver command regalia gleaming. He had led fleets for 90 years and had never been addressed so casually. This is highly irregular. Admiral Fancy Pants, question. Rena pointed at the tactical display showing the swarm's advance. How many ships have you lost using conventional tactics? 73 vessels, but... And how many bugs have you killed using the same tactics? Catherine's jaw plates tightened. Preliminary estimates suggest minimal casualties on their side. Right. So your perfectly logical approach has a success rate of basically 0. Rena clapped her hands together. Which means we literally cannot do worse. Everyone with me so far? Silence. I said everyone with me? Rena cupped her ear theatrically. A junior officer in the back, Ensign Miracole, raised her voice tentatively. Yes. Louder. Yes. Miracole practically shouted, then looked horrified at herself. Beautiful. See, Admiral? Your people can make noise. They just need permission. Rena pulled up a data file. Now, I spent last night reading through your rejected strategies database. Holy hell, you folks have some wild ideas that you've been sitting on. She projected a list. Catherine's eyes widened as he recognized proposals that had been dismissed by the War Council as too unorthodox. Operation Meteor Storm. Fill cargo ships with random debris and crash them into swarm formations at random intervals. You rejected this because wasteful resource allocation. We're doing it. Operation Phantom Signal. Broadcast fake distress calls, false fleet movements, and fake communication chatter across all frequencies simultaneously. Rejected for being undignified deception. Also doing it. Operation Paint Job. Coat ship hulls with reactive pigments that constantly change color and thermal signature. Rejected because aesthetically inconsistent with fleet standards. Definitely doing this one, it sounds awesome. Catherine stepped forward. These tactics violate every principle of coordinated warfare. How can we maintain fleet cohesion if every ship is acting randomly? You can't. That's the point. Rena zoomed in on the swarm's latest attack pattern. Look at this. They're perfect. They move in mathematically optimal formations. They allocate resources with 0 waste. They're playing chess at a grandmaster level. She grinned. So we're going to play Calvin Ball. I do not understand this reference, Catherine admitted. Calvin Ball is a game where the rules change constantly and nobody knows what's happening. It's chaos theory weaponized. The Razakine adapt fast, but adaptation requires pattern recognition. Can't recognize a pattern if there isn't one. A senior tactical officer named Vorin spoke up, his voice stronger than the usual whisper. Even if we embrace randomness, the swarm still has superior numbers and firepower. How do we address that? Great question, Vorin. We don't fight them head-on. We annoy them to death. Rena pulled up a star map. The swarm is expanding along predictable vectors, consuming everything in their path. They're efficient. But efficiency has a weakness, it's allergic to waste. She highlighted 3 star systems. These systems have nothing valuable. Barren rocks, depleted gas giants, stellar dead zones. The swarm has been ignoring them because there's nothing to consume. Precisely, Catherine said. So why? We make them think there's something valuable there. We seed false energy readings, broadcast signals suggesting massive resource deposits, maybe crash a few empty ships there with their reactors rigged to emit weird signatures. The swarm investigates, finds nothing, wastes time and energy. Miracle spoke up again, louder this time. And while they're investigating dead ends, we hit their real targets from unexpected angles. Look at you, Ensign. You're getting it. Rena pointed at her. Exactly. We create noise. Lots and lots of noise. False targets, contradictory data, ships that flee for no reason, ships that attack in weird patterns. We turn this entire theater of war into one big confusing mess. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Every instinct he'd honed over decades screamed that this was wrong. But those same instincts had watched 73 ships die. How long do we have to implement this chaos strategy? The swarm's main fleet will reach the Korvathi core worlds in 4 months, Rena said, all humor dropping from her voice. We need to slow them down, confuse them, and frustrate them enough that they make mistakes. Hive minds are optimized for efficiency. We're going to make this fight so inefficient that their own programming works against them. She looked around the room. I know this feels wrong. Your whole culture is built on silence, order, careful deliberation. Mine's built on jazz music, improvisational comedy, and arguing about sports. But right now your way is getting you killed. Rena's expression softened. Let me teach you how to be beautifully, tactically stupid. It might just save your empire. Admiral Catherine took a breath. Then he did something he'd never done in his entire military career. He smiled. Deploy the chaos, he said. The first strike. The Korvathi frigate Whispering Dawn had been scheduled for decommissioning before Rena Castellanos requisitioned it for what she called Operation. Why though? Now it drifted through the Belker system, broadcasting 14 different distress signals simultaneously, each in a different language, each contradicting the others, each accompanied by a different genre of human music. Currently, the ship was blasting something Rena called death metal at volumes that made the hull vibrate. Captain Jorvith stood on the bridge, his sensory tendrils twitching with discomfort. I still don't understand why we're playing this auditory assault. Because it's annoying, Rena said cheerfully from the communication station. She'd insisted on being aboard for the first field test. The swarm processes all sensory data to build tactical models. We're going to give them indigestion. Lieutenant Shin, one of 3 humans Rena had borrowed from the Terran Expeditionary Corps, laughed from the weapons station. I once saw Rena win a negotiation by playing bagpipe music for 6 straight hours. The Deltharian delegation surrendered just to make it stop. Different scenario, same principle, Rena said. All right, Jorvith, how's our bait looking? The captain checked his displays. The modified cargo containers are in position. Energy signatures are fluctuating exactly as you specified, completely illogical and inconsistent. Perfect. The swarm should detect us any minute now. As if summoned by her words, alarms chimed softly across the bridge. Jorvith's skin paled to ash gray. Contact. Razakine bioships, 3 of them approaching at combat speed. On the view screen, the swarm vessels emerged from the darkness. They were living nightmares, organic ships that looked like they'd been grown rather than built, all chitinous armor and pulsing neural tissue. Each was twice the size of the Whispering Dawn. They're charging weapons, Lieutenant Shin reported, his hand hovering over the firing controls. Don't shoot back yet, Rena ordered. Jorvith, execute evasive pattern delta random. There is no pattern delta random in our tactical database. Exactly. Just fly around like you've never piloted before. Do loops, barrel rolls, fly backwards, I don't care. Just be weird about it. Jorvith's training warred with his orders for precisely 2 seconds. Then he gripped the controls and sent the Whispering Dawn into a corkscrew maneuver that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. The Razakine ships fired. Biological projectiles screamed through space, and missed completely. The swarm had calculated intercept trajectories based on standard evasive patterns. Jorvith's random flailing wasn't in their database. They whiffed it. Shin hooped. Captain, you're flying like a drunk pilot and it's working. Now release the cargo, Rena commanded. Jorvith triggered the release mechanism. 50 cargo containers burst open simultaneously, disgorging their contents into space. Thousands of pieces of random debris, each painted with reactive pigments that shifted through the entire light spectrum. Chunks of old hull plating, decorative sculptures from Korvathi museums, even a significant quantity of children's toys. The debris cloud spread out, each piece broadcasting its own random energy signature. The Razakine ships stopped. On Rena's scanner, she could see them trying to process what they were seeing. Thousands of potential targets, none following predictable patterns, all seemingly important based on their energy emissions. They're confused, Jorvith breathed. I can see their scanning patterns overlapping. They're trying to identify priority targets. And finding none, Rena said with satisfaction. Because there aren't any. It's all garbage. Expensive, sensor-reflective garbage, but garbage nonetheless. Shin hit them now, randomized fire pattern. The human lieutenant grinned and opened fire. But instead of targeting weak points or attempting calculated damage, he just shot wherever looked interesting. Some hits struck armor. Some missed entirely. One lucky shot punched through a neural cluster purely by accident. The damaged swarm ship lurched, its movements suddenly erratic. What's happening to it? Jorvith asked. Rena leaned forward, fascinated. I think it's trying to adapt to randomness by analyzing our random pattern, but there is no pattern, so it's creating false correlations. Look, it's positioning itself to defend against an attack vector we're not using because we might have used it once by accident. The swarm ship's companions moved to support it, forming a defensive formation that made no tactical sense given the Whispering Dawn's actual position. They're fighting ghosts, Shin said wonderingly. They're fighting their own predictions, Rena corrected. Jorvith, while they're busy defending against imaginary threats, let's actually run away. Full speed, random direction. The captain didn't hesitate this time. He punched the engines and sent the frigate streaking away at a 37-degree angle from any logical escape vector. The Razakine ships, still processing conflicting data, took 8 full seconds to pursue, an eternity in combat terms. By then, the Whispering Dawn had jumped to FTL, leaving behind only debris and contradictory sensor data. In the Strategic Operations Center back on Thessera Prime, Admiral Catherine watched the engagement data with something approaching disbelief. The hierarch stood behind him equally stunned. A single frigate engaged 3 swarm bioships, Velman said slowly, and suffered 0 casualties. While completing no strategic objectives, Kisara added. But also completing no strategic objectives, Thexol finished. The swarm wasted resources on worthless targets and still failed to destroy our ship. Catherine pulled up the tactical analysis. According to his calculations, the swarm had expended more energy and computational resources on that single engagement than the Whispering Dawn was worth by a factor of 10. A message came through from Rena. Phase 1 successful. Recommend immediate deployment of chaos tactics across all fronts. Also, do you guys have any more of that purple fruit from your welcome basket? It's delicious. Admiral Catherine found himself doing something unprecedented. He laughed. It was quiet, hesitant, and slightly wheezy. But it was genuine. Deploy the fleet, he ordered. All ships are to engage using unpredictable methods. And someone get Castellanos more fruit. The swarm's confusion. The Razakine central nexus existed in a dimension slightly adjacent to normal space. A living cathedral of neural tissue stretched across 17 cubic kilometers. Within its pulsing chambers, the collective consciousness of 14 billion individual organisms processed reality itself. The swarm had consumed galaxies. It had outlasted empires. It had evolved beyond the limitations of individual thought into something approaching omniscience. It had never encountered anything like humanity's weaponized stupidity. Problem, the Nexus observed. Patterns not emerging. Data contradictory. In the 3 weeks since the Whispering Dawn incident, the Korvathi fleet had deployed Rena's chaos tactics across 47 systems. The results were incomprehensible. Ships that fled before engaging. Ships that attacked while fleeing. Ships that broadcast surrender messages while firing weapons. Ships that painted themselves to look like other ships. Ships that played music so discordant it disrupted swarm communication frequencies. Worst of all, cargo vessels full of nothing. The swarm had diverted 63 bioships to intercept what sensors identified as a heavily laden transport convoy. Upon capture, the vessels contained 7,000 tons of decorative rocks, a complete collection of Korvathi romantic poetry in physical book form, and what the humans apparently called rubber duckies. Efficiency quotient declining, the Nexus noted. Resource allocation suboptimal. Adaptation protocols failing. The problem was fundamental. The Razakine evolved through pattern recognition. They observed an enemy's tactics, identified the underlying logic, and developed countermeasures. This process had worked against every species they'd encountered for 3 million years. But the Korvathi weren't using logic anymore. At the Battle of Theshan Gate, 30 Korvathi cruisers had engaged a swarm battle cluster. The cruisers had ignored all strategic positions, fought in formations that violated basic physics assumptions, and retreated at what appeared to be random intervals. 3 times, ships had approached the swarm with weapons powered down, only to fire at point-blank range before immediately fleeing. The swarm had adapted to aggressive tactics. They'd adapted to defensive tactics. They'd even adapted to mixed strategy approaches. They couldn't adapt to tactics that changed every 17 seconds for no discernible reason. Hypothesis: Korvathi command structure compromised by neural degradation, the Nexus theorized. Enemy decisions reflect damaged cognitive processes. But that didn't explain the effectiveness. Despite their apparent madness, the Korvathi were winning. Not through superior firepower or brilliant strategy, but through sheer confusion. Swarm resources were being wasted chasing false targets, analyzing meaningless data, and preparing for attacks that never came from directions that made no sense. The swarm's efficiency, its greatest strength, had become a vulnerability. Aboard the Korvathi flagship Voice of Reason, renamed by Rena from the previous Silent Contemplation, Admiral Kethrin reviewed the latest reports with something approaching joy. The swarm is pulling back from the Viridian sector, he announced. 16 bioships have withdrawn to defensive positions. Rena, who was currently teaching a group of bridge officers how to play poker, looked up from her cards. They're retreating? Already? Not retreating, said Ensign Miracole, who'd become Rena's unofficial protege. Repositioning to better analyze our tactics. Which means they're trying to find a pattern that doesn't exist. Rena laid down her cards, a terrible hand she'd been bluffing with. Perfect. Time to make things weirder. She pulled up the tactical display. Kethrin, what's the most important system we've been defending? The Korvathi core shipyards at Thessera Secondary. They're our primary construction facility. Great. Let's abandon them. The bridge went silent. Excuse me? Kethrin's voice was dangerously quiet. Just temporarily. We pull all defenses, make it look completely unguarded. The swarm will think it's a trap because no sane civilization leaves their most important strategic asset undefended. Rena grinned. And while they're being cautious about the shipyards, we'll actually fortify something worthless like, what's the least important thing you have? The agricultural moon of Pelth 4, offered Lieutenant Vorin. It grows decorative flowers for export. No strategic value whatsoever. Perfect. We turn Pelth 4 into a fortress. Guns everywhere, shields, mines, the whole deal. The swarm will see us defending it heavily and assume it must be critical. This is insane, Kethrin said, but he was smiling. They'll waste resources attacking a flower farm, while ignoring actual important targets because they seem too easy. Rena stood up, stretching. It's reverse psychology on a galactic scale. Hierarchs Velman appeared on the communication screen. Castellanos, we've received troubling data from our intelligence network. The swarm appears to be hesitating. Hesitating? Their advance has slowed by 43%. They're spending increasing amounts of time scanning systems before entering. Some forward elements have withdrawn entirely to await reinforcement. Velman's expression was unreadable. It's as if they're becoming cautious. Rena's eyes lit up. They're scared. The Razakine don't experience fear, Velman said. They're a hive intelligence without individual. Not scared like we understand it. But uncertainty is fear for a collective consciousness that's used to perfect information. We've introduced doubt into a species that's never had to doubt before. She pulled up a star chart showing swarm positions. Look at this. They're consolidating forces, waiting for better data before committing to attacks. That's not adaptation, that's paralysis analysis. Miracole spoke up. If they're uncertain, they'll eventually commit more resources to intelligence gathering. Try to overwhelm us with data collection. Then we feed them data, Rena said. All of it fake, contradictory, and magnificently useless. She turned to Admiral Kethrin. How many ships can we spare for a special operation? Define special operation. I need volunteers to do the dumbest thing imaginable. Fly directly into swarm-controlled space, broadcast complete nonsense on all frequencies and then fly away. Kethrin didn't hesitate. I'll lead it myself. Rena blinked. Really? I was expecting more resistance. The Admiral's smile was sharp. 3 months ago, I would have never considered such a plan. But 3 months ago I was losing. You've taught us that chaos isn't the absence of strategy, it's a strategy that transcends traditional thinking. He stood straighter. Besides, I've always wanted to try something completely illogical. It sounds liberating. That's the spirit. Rena clapped him on the shoulder. Let's go confuse the hell out of some space bugs. The breaking point. The operation was called Thundering Whisper, a name that perfectly captured humanity's approach to warfare. 12 Korvathi ships, led by Admiral Catherine's flagship, jumped directly into the heart of swarm territory. Then they started broadcasting. Attention Razakine Swarm, Catherine announced, his voice no longer the controlled whisper of his people but a booming declaration. We are here to negotiate. Also to fight. But mostly to see if you like music. The voice of reason began transmitting every audio file in the Korvathi cultural database simultaneously. Ancient ceremonial chants clashed with modern symphonies. Children's educational songs overlapped with solemn funeral dirges. And underneath it all, Rena had added a selection from Earth's musical catalog. Jazz, dubstep, Mongolian throat singing and something called synthwave. The result was audio chaos that somehow formed patterns before immediately destroying them. 47 swarm bioships converged on the Korvathi position. Their weapons charged, biological missiles growing in organic launch tubes. Then the Korvathi ships began to dance. Evasive pattern Omega chaos. Catherine commanded, and 12 warships started moving in what could only be described as synchronized randomness. They spun, twisted, accelerated and decelerated without reason, flying in formations that shifted between geometric precision and complete disorder every few seconds. Rena watched from the tactical station, analyzing swarm responses. They're trying to predict our movements, but every time they think they've found the pattern, we change it because we literally don't have a pattern. Lieutenant Shin, who'd requested transfer to Catherine's crew, launched missiles that spiraled through space in corkscrewing paths. Some flew in straight lines. Others made loops. A few appeared to be chasing each other. The swarm fired. 98% of their shots missed. The remaining 2% hit shields that had been randomly reinforced in certain sections for no tactical reason, except those happened to be the sections that got hit. Pure luck, Shin said gleefully. I love it. But Rena noticed something else. The swarm ships weren't just missing, they were slowing down. Their targeting solutions were taking longer. Their formation adjustments were delayed. They're overheating their neural processing, she realized. We're forcing them to calculate so many possibilities that they're hitting cognitive limits. In the Razakine central nexus, alarms screamed through neural pathways. Critical error. Prediction models collapsing. Enemy behavior exceeds computational parameters. The swarm was experiencing something it had never known in 3 million years of existence. Information overload. Every action the Korvathi took generated hundreds of possible interpretations. Every new tactic contradicted previous data. The nexus was drowning in noise. Hypothesis Iteration 47. Enemy employing advanced quantum deception technology. Hypothesis Iteration 48. Enemy command structure randomized to prevent predictability. Hypothesis Iteration 49. Enemy species fundamentally incomprehensible. That last hypothesis violated everything the swarm understood about reality. The universe operated on rules. Biology followed patterns. Intelligence was predictable. Wasn't it? Emergency protocol. Designate Korvathi as probability immune entity. Reassess strategic value of campaign. For the first time in the swarm's existence, it considered that consumption might not be worth the cost. Aboard the Voice of Reason, alarms interrupted the chaos. Swarm ships are withdrawing, Ensign Miracole reported from her station. All of them. They're falling back to defensive positions. Catherine looked at Rena. Is this a trap? Maybe? Probably not. Rena studied the tactical display. I think we actually hurt them. Not physically, cognitively. We made thinking about us too expensive. She pulled up biological scans of the retreating swarm ships. Look at their neural activity. It's off the charts. They're burning through energy just trying to process what we're doing. So we're weaponizing confusion, Catherine said slowly. We're weaponizing ourselves. Our unpredictability, our chaos, our beautiful human-influenced weirdness. Rena turned to face him. The swarm's greatest weapon is perfect adaptation. But you can't adapt to something that never repeats itself. A communication came through from Thessera Prime. Hierarchs Velman appeared, and for the first time since Rena had met him, he looked almost animated. Castellanos. Catherine. The swarm is retreating across all fronts. They've withdrawn from 14 systems in the last 3 hours. Are they regrouping for a larger assault? Catherine asked. Unknown. But our intelligence suggests their neural activity has increased by 300% while their offensive operations have decreased by 60%. Whatever we're doing, it's working. Rena felt a chill. They're not retreating, they're thinking. They're trying to solve us like a mathematical problem. Can they? Velman asked. I don't know. The human brain can't be solved by logic because we're not logical creatures. We evolved to be creative, adaptive, and occasionally insane. The Korvathi were logical before I showed up, but you're learning to be flexible. She stood up, pacing. The question is, can the swarm learn to be illogical? Can a hive mind that spent millions of years optimizing efficiency suddenly embrace chaos? Catherine's expression was grim. And if they can? Then we need to get weirder, Rena said. Way weirder. Because the moment they figure out how to think like us, we lose our only advantage. Miracle spoke up. What if we don't let them figure us out? What if we keep changing faster than they can adapt? Rena looked at the young ensign with approval. What did you have in mind? The swarm retreats to think. So we don't give them time to think. We keep them reacting, keep them confused, keep them burning neural energy until... Miracle hesitated. Until they break, Rena finished softly. We overwhelm their consciousness itself. It was a horrifying thought. And also, possibly, the only way to win. Get me a direct line to every ship in the fleet, Rena said. It's time to teach the entire Korvathi military how to improvise. The final gambit. The Korvathi Empire had never seen anything like the fleet that assembled at the Meridian Convergence Point. 300 ships, each now designated with what Rena called personality profiles. There was the dramatic entrance, which only engaged enemies by emerging from FTL directly in their midst while broadcasting theatrical speeches. The persistent annoyance followed swarm ships around, occasionally firing single shots before fleeing. The philosophical inquiry broadcast endless questions on all frequencies. What is your purpose? Do you dream? Have you considered vegetarianism? Admiral Catherine commanded from the voice of reason, but he no longer commanded in the traditional sense. Instead, he'd adopted what Rena called jazz leadership, setting a theme and letting individual captains improvise variations. The swarm's main fleet is holding position at the Corvex Nebula, Ensign Miracle reported. She'd been promoted to lieutenant and now served as Catherine's tactical advisor. 800 bioships. They're waiting for us. They're trying to force a conventional battle, Catherine observed. They want predictability. Rena nodded. Which means we give them everything except that. Status on operation, confusion cascade. All ships ready, Miracle confirmed. Though I still think this is the most ridiculous thing we've ever attempted. That's how I know it'll work. The plan was beautifully simple and completely insane. The Korvathi fleet would split into 17 groups, each executing a different strategy simultaneously. Group 1 would attack aggressively. Group 2 would defend a random point in space. Group 3 would flee in panic. Group 4 would attempt to communicate. Group 5 would play dead. Group 6 would perform military drills as if the swarm wasn't there. Group 7 would paint their ships different colors mid-battle. And so on. All groups, Catherine announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd learned to embrace chaos. Execute your assigned behaviors. Remember, there is no coordination. There is no plan. There is only magnificent confusion. The fleet jumped. The Razikine Central Nexus had prepared for this moment. It had spent weeks analyzing Korvathi tactics, building probability models, developing counter-strategies. It had devoted 87% of its collective processing power to understanding the enemy. It was not enough. The Korvathi fleet emerged from FTL in 17 different locations simultaneously. Some ships attacked immediately. Others broadcast surrender. Still others appeared to be fighting each other. One group was performing what looked like ceremonial maneuvers while completely ignoring the swarm. Processing. Behaviors contradict. Tactical models invalid. Adapting. But how could the swarm adapt when there were 17 different patterns, each contradicting the others? How could it develop a counter-strategy when the enemy appeared to have no strategy? The Nexus tried to prioritize threats. The aggressively attacking ships were dangerous, except they fled after minimal engagement. The fleeing ships seemed vulnerable, except they turned and fought when pursued. The ships playing dead suddenly came to life. The ships attempting communication fired weapons mid-sentence. Hypothesis: enemy employing distributed command structure with independent tactical authority. The Nexus allocated resources to engage each group separately, developing 17 different response patterns. Then Rena gave the next command. All groups switch behaviors. Aggressive ships start fleeing. Fleeing ships attack. Everyone else, pick a new random behavior from the list. The Korvathi fleet suddenly transformed. Ships that had been attacking were now running. Defenders became attackers. The ceremonial group started broadcasting surrender messages while firing missiles. The swarm's 17 carefully developed response patterns became instantly obsolete. Critical error. Adaptation velocity insufficient. Enemy behavior mutation rate exceeds processing capacity. In the central nexus, neural pathways began overheating. The swarm was thinking too hard, burning through biological resources to process impossible amounts of contradictory data. It was experiencing the cognitive equivalent of running full speed in 17 directions at once. Their response time is increasing, Lieutenant Shin reported from the voice of reason. They're taking 8 seconds to react now instead of 2. Hit them harder, Rena ordered. All ships, maximize weirdness. Do the thing you've always wanted to do but thought was too stupid. Across the fleet, Korvathi captains who'd spent their entire lives following protocol let loose. Ships started flying in spirals. One captain had his vessel rotate continuously while firing in random directions. Another began broadcasting historical lectures about Korvathi philosophy at maximum volume. A third ship appeared to be attempting to dance with a swarm bioship. The battle descended into beautiful chaos. And slowly, impossibly, the swarm began to crack. Bioships started responding to threats that didn't exist. They formed defensive formations against ships that were fleeing. They ignored actual attacks while preparing for imaginary ones. Their perfect coordination fragmented as different sections of the fleet adopted incompatible strategies. They're fighting themselves, Miracle breathed. Look, that cluster of bioships just fired on their own forces. The Razakine Central Nexus was collapsing under the weight of its own intelligence. Every attempt to understand the enemy generated new questions. Every answer created more confusion. The swarm, which had consumed galaxies through perfect coordination, was tearing itself apart trying to solve an unsolvable problem. Emergency protocol, full withdrawal. Designated enemy as incomprehensible threat. Ceasing operations in this region. The swarm began to retreat, not tactically but frantically. Bioships broke formation and fled toward the edges of Korvathi space. Admiral Kethrin watched them go, scarcely believing what he was seeing. We won, he said quietly. We actually won. Rena collapsed into a chair, exhausted. We didn't win. We made them decide we weren't worth the headache. After the laughter. 3 months after the swarm's withdrawal, the Grand Deliberation Chamber looked different. The obsidian walls still stretched kilometers underground, but now they echoed with something unprecedented: conversation. Hierarchs Velman, Kisara, and Thexol sat on their floating platforms, but they no longer whispered. Around them, junior counselors debated openly, sometimes raising their voices. Occasionally someone even laughed. Rena Castellanos sat on the steps below the hierarchs, exactly where she'd sat during her first visit. But now she wore formal Korvathi ceremonial robes, which she'd modified with extra pockets and too much personality, according to Kisara. The final report confirms it, Velman announced, his voice strong and clear. The Razakine swarm has withdrawn beyond our sensor range. They've abandoned 14 systems and dissolved their forward fleet elements. Incredible, Thexol said. We defeated an enemy that had consumed hundreds of civilizations, and we did it without a single major fleet engagement. You confused them to death, Rena corrected. There's a difference. Kisara, who'd been the most skeptical hierarch from the beginning, looked at Rena with something approaching respect. Our military analysts have studied your tactics extensively. They believe we can codify your chaos strategy into formal doctrine. Please don't, Rena said immediately. Why not? Because the moment you turn chaos into doctrine, it stops being chaos. The swarm lost because we were unpredictable. If you make unpredictability predictable, it defeats the purpose. Velman nodded slowly. So how do we defend ourselves if the swarm returns? By staying flexible. By remembering that there's no single right way to do things. By keeping some of that beautiful weirdness we've developed. Rena stood up, addressing the council. The Korvathi Empire spent 8,000 years perfecting silence and order. That built you into a great civilization. But greatness without adaptability is just a really impressive tomb. She gestured to the counselors. Look around. You're talking to each other. Debating. Disagreeing. A few months ago that would have been unthinkable. Now it's normal. That's evolution, Admiral Kethrin entered the chamber, accompanied by Lieutenant Miracole and several other officers. They'd been invited to address the council, another unprecedented event. "The fleet wishes to express gratitude," Kethrin said formally. Then he smiled. "And also to request that we never, ever have to be that chaotic again." It was exhausting. Laughter rippled through the chamber, genuine, unrestrained laughter. The sound would have scandalized the council of just 4 months ago. Now it felt natural. "I have a question," Miracole spoke up. "For Rena. You taught us to fight with chaos and randomness. But humanity must have some underlying principles, some core values. How do you balance chaos with purpose?" Rena considered this. "Good question. Here's the thing, humans are chaotic, yes. But our chaos serves something. We're creative because we're trying to solve problems. We're unpredictable because we're adapting to change. We laugh because it helps us deal with fear." She looked around the chamber. The swarm was efficient without purpose. They consumed because that's what they were programmed to do. You were orderly without flexibility. You followed protocol because that's what you'd always done. Both approaches work, until they don't. "And humanity?" Velman asked. "We survive through creative adaptation. We change our methods but keep our values. We're chaotic in execution but consistent in what we care about, protecting our people, exploring the unknown, and occasionally making really bad puns." "Speaking of bad puns," Lieutenant Shin said from the back, "I've been teaching the crew Earth jokes. Want to hear one about?" "No," several voices chorused immediately. More laughter. Rena pulled out her battered data pad. "I've compiled a final report for you. Tactical analyses, recommended training programs, cultural integration strategies. But the most important part is this: don't try to be human. Be Korvathi, just be a more flexible version." She transmitted the files to the council. "You've already started. You're talking openly, laughing, questioning protocol. That's not becoming human, that's becoming yourselves, but better." Kisara reviewed the files. "These training programs, they involve improvisation exercises, creative problem solving, even something called comedy workshops. All proven methods for developing cognitive flexibility," Rena confirmed. "The swarm couldn't adapt to chaos because they'd never experienced it. You can because you're learning to embrace it." Velman stood, a gesture of deep respect in Korvathi culture. "Rena Castellanos, on behalf of the Korvathi Empire, we offer you permanent citizenship and a position as strategic advisor." "I appreciate that, but I'm going to decline." Silence fell. "Not because I don't like you," Rena added quickly, "but because you don't need me anymore. You've learned the lesson. Now you need to teach yourselves the next one, whatever that is." She grinned. "Besides, I've already accepted a consulting contract from the Viridian Assembly. Apparently they're having trouble with a species called the Mekros Collective, and they think my particular brand of insanity might help." Kethrin stepped forward. "Before you go, the fleet wanted to give you something." He presented a small crystal, a Korvathi honor marker. "This designates you as she who laughs at death. It's usually reserved for legendary warriors." "I like it," Rena said, accepting the crystal. "Though technically I laugh at most things, not just death." "We noticed," Kisara said dryly. As Rena prepared to leave, Miracole approached her. "Will humanity ever consider joining the Korvathi Alliance formally?" "Maybe someday. We're still figuring ourselves out." Rena smiled. "But here's some free advice. When you meet other humans, don't be surprised by anything. We're all weird in our own ways. I'm actually pretty normal by our standards." The Korvathi exchanged concerned glances. "That's troubling," Velman admitted. "That's humanity," Rena replied. "Troubling, chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely worth knowing. Just like you're becoming." She walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. "Oh, and one more thing. If the swarm ever comes back, don't fight them the same way twice. Stay weird, friends." With that, Rena Castellanos left the grand deliberation chamber. Behind her, the Council of Hierarchs returned to their discussion, louder, livelier, and more uncertain than ever before. They were discovering a beautiful way to govern. Outside, Rena looked up at Thessera Prime's violet sky and smiled. Somewhere out there, the Razakine swarm was probably still trying to calculate what had happened to them. Let them wonder. The universe was big enough for both silence and laughter, for order and chaos, for efficiency and beautiful, tactical stupidity. And Rena Castellanos had a new client waiting.